You look at a house today and ask sensible questions. How much does it cost? How far is it from work? Does the roof leak? Is the neighborhood quiet? Or does someone nearby own a motorcycle and unresolved emotional issues? Ancient humans had a different checklist. Is there water nearby? Can we find enough food without walking all day? Will this place flood? Is there firewood? Can animals reach us at night? Has another group already decided it belongs to them? A bad choice did more than lower the property value. It could leave the group hungry, exposed, or several kilometers from the nearest reliable water source. So how did ancient humans decide where to live? For most of prehistory, people were not choosing one permanent home. Hunter-gatherers moved between camps as seasons changed, animals migrated, plants ripened, and nearby resources became harder to find. Choosing where to live was a decision people made again and again as the seasons and the landscape changed around them. Once finding dinner required half the day and everyone's remaining patience, the neighborhood had declined. Ancient people were looking for the best place to be right now. A riverside camp could provide fish during one season and become a cloud of insects during another. A valley filled with grazing animals might empty once the herds moved on. A dependable spring could weaken during drought. Every location was a temporary deal, good until conditions changed. Water was usually the first condition. People could survive an unsuccessful hunt. They could not postpone drinking for very long, while the group discussed alternative strategies. A camp needed access to a stream, spring, lake, or another dependable source, especially when children, injured adults, and older people were traveling with the group. But camping directly beside the water was not always wise. Rivers flood. Wet ground attracts insects. Large animals visit the same drinking places and rarely check whether the site has already been reserved. Low ground can also become cold at night, while anything living upstream may contribute something unpleasant to the supply. The useful position was often close enough to reach water easily, but high and dry enough to avoid becoming part of it. The same calculation applied to almost everything else. Stay near useful resources without camping directly inside the danger attached to them. Trees were valuable because they offered shade, fuel, tool material, and sometimes food. But dense vegetation could also hide predators or hostile visitors. Higher ground gave people a better view, but exposed them to wind. A cave blocked rain and reduced the number of directions people had to watch at night. It might also be damp, smoky, far from water, or already occupied by something with stronger opinions about ownership. A roof was useful. The surrounding landscape still had to work. A shelter overlooking a valley could provide access to water, fuel, animals, and routes through the landscape. Another cave might offer excellent protection from rain, while placing dinner several hours away. Ancient humans chose whatever place reduced the total amount of work and danger, roof or no roof. Once water and basic protection looked acceptable, people had to calculate the daily commute. Hunter-gatherers often traveled outward from a central camp to hunt, gather plants, collect fuel, or find raw materials before returning. Every additional kilometer cost time and energy. A rich patch of food might still be useful several kilometers away, but someone eventually had to carry it back. Plants become much less appealing once they begin charging delivery fees. A strong campsite sat within reach of several productive areas. Animals might pass through one part of the landscape, edible plants might grow in another, and a river could provide fish, while higher ground offered wood, stone, and better visibility. A good camp gave people enough useful places within a reasonable journey spread across the surrounding land, and reasonable depended on who was making that journey. A hunter carrying little equipment could travel farther than a parent gathering food with a child. Someone returning with meat moved differently from someone carrying water or firewood. A camp that looked convenient to one person could quietly create hours of extra labor for everyone else. Choosing where to stay was probably discussed by the group because the whole group would live with the result. Some members would also spend far more time hauling that result uphill. Weather could expose a bad decision very quickly. A calm clearing might look ideal until rain turned it into a pool. A shaded valley could be comfortable during the afternoon and bitterly cold before sunrise. A sheltered cave might become unbearable once smoke from the fire had nowhere to go. People learned to read the signs. Flood marks showed where water had reached before. Bent vegetation revealed the usual wind direction. Frost lingered longer on certain slopes, and the shape of the ground showed where rain would collect. They had no weather app, they had repeated experience and a powerful interest in not rebuilding the shelter during a storm. Hunter-gatherers weren't necessarily wandering into completely unknown land every few weeks. Many moved through through established territories and returned to camps used by earlier generations. They knew when fruit appeared, when animals passed through, and when a water source usually became unreliable. A temporary campsite could still have a long history. Old fireplaces, paths, discarded tools, stories, and burials made a place easier to recognize and use again. Earlier visits had already answered some of the dangerous questions. Does this area flood? Where is the nearest water? Which direction does the wind come from? What lives in that cave? A returning group arrived somewhere that memory had already made cheaper and safer. Some locations became more important than ordinary camps. Karne 4, in what is now Jordan, became a major gathering place around 20,000 years ago. Archaeologists found huts, burials, tools, ornaments, and evidence that people traveled there from across the wider region. It appears to have been more than a convenient place to sleep. Different groups repeatedly gathered there for exchange, cooperation, and social life. People mattered too. Water and food kept bodies alive, but relationships provided allies, information, childcare, trade, and help when resources failed. A location could be environmentally excellent and socially useless if everyone you depended on lived several days away. Where someone stayed could depend on relatives, friendships, marriage, cooperation, or conflict. Sometimes moving solved a resource problem. Sometimes it solved a people problem. Humans may have appreciated mobile life partly because no disagreement needed to become a permanent neighborhood arrangement. Mobility gave people options. If food declined, weather shifted, illness spread, or relationships became unbearable, the group could leave. Agriculture made that much harder. Once people planted crops, constructed storage, and invested months of labor into buildings, the location had to keep working for longer. Soil quality, access to water, and protection for stored food all became critical. Families could no longer relocate whenever nearby resources declined because their most important resource was growing in the ground and refusing to come along. Permanent settlements brought larger food stores and more durable homes. They also brought failed harvests, accumulated waste, disputes over land, and new opportunities for disease among dense populations and domestic animals. Permanence offered stability and then presented the invoice. For mobile groups, the question was, can this place support us during the coming season? For farming communities, it became, can we remain here long enough to harvest what we planted? That required wells, walls, paths, storage pits, and eventually rules about who controlled each part of the land. A campsite could be abandoned. A village developed property disputes. So how did ancient humans decide where to live? They looked for dependable water, nearby food, fuel, shelter, safe ground, and manageable travel routes. They considered how much daily work the location would create. They watched the weather, remembered earlier visits, and stayed close enough to the people they needed. For much of prehistory, people returned to a familiar circuit of seasonal places: the dry season camp, the river used in spring, the grove where fruit appeared, and the shelter that blocked winter winds. Home could include all of them. The real skill was knowing when to arrive and when to leave before a useful place became a dangerous one. The next time you complain about your neighborhood, remember, at least the river probably isn't coming through the floor. More ancient life stories are on the way.